College football nerds here talking the game, Michigan-Ohio State. This one has been a long time coming, kind of eyeballing this one all season. Going to remind y'all, because we might have some new faces around here, please like, please subscribe. Also, collegefootballnerds.com. If you haven't been checking us out this year, we launched this platform for y'all. It's a college football stats heaven. We've got our model that we're going to showcase here that you can pit any two teams against each other. It's a real-time simulation. It's on our website for you to try. It's free to use. We've got a pick 'em going. We've got top 25 that the fans are voting on. We also have our model generate a 1 through 133 where it simulates each team playing every other team and then ranks based on wins and losses. NFLU stats, so you can track your team's stats, your favorite team in Michigan, Ohio State, all the players that are in the NFL, one click, you can get them all in one spot. NFL stats, don't have to go chasing box scores. All right, Josh, first thing, let's talk about something that has been maybe questionable in the past, at least for Ohio State, but is legit in both of these teams this year. I think a lot of people are going to say it's a product of their offenses that they've faced, but I'm here to tell you both of these defenses are truly legit this year. Let's get started by talking about that.
So when you said questionable, I thought you were going to lead off with my exercise routines. No, the reality is, in terms of defense, Michigan is number one in our relative performance metric, meaning how did you do against the teams you played versus how everyone else did against those teams. So totally performance adjusted, 30% below opponent averages. Ohio State is number 2 at 28%, and that's total defense per game. These are phenomenal defenses, it's 1 and 2, as this said. Those were actually the overall ranks in terms of relative performance. It's 1 and 2 Michigan, Ohio State. So you just flip flop them. These teams are phenomenal on the defensive side of the ball, and it leads into a lot of the advanced stats and overall metrics. In terms of FPI's power index, and I know FPI's had a hard time, frankly, shout out to our model that you can run at collegefootballnerds.com. Our model has been outperforming them. We've been hovering between 55 and 65% against the spread, which if you do all games, that's actually quite good. And still, though, FPI has Ohio State 1, Michigan 2. Note, Ohio State actually jumped Michigan this past week after the Maryland game, and it's almost entirely due to the defenses, because the offenses have been good, particularly Michigan's. They have been good. They haven't been what Ohio State fans have been used to, but they're still better offenses than most teams in the country. But the defenses have been truly elite, and that's both objectively and subjectively true. When you watch Michigan and you watch Ohio State play defense this year, there are not many busts. There's constant pressure on the opposing quarterback. Runs are difficult. Everything is hard. These defenses are playing at a high level. They're diverse. They've been able to be multiple in what they're doing. They can throw different formations at you. They can handle different formations. And that is the cornerstone of this game. And, the winner of the game is going to have to work, because being that these are two teams that have rarely given up many points, and Michigan notably given up 24 points as a season high against Maryland, it's going to be something if one of them scores 35 or 40. And so you have to expect this is going to be the kind of game that you would have seen 20 years ago, which is sort of a 24-27 type affair where two teams are just absolutely landing body blow after body blow, and the team that can land the haymaker in the late third, early fourth quarter is going to be the team that can pull out with a win. And so, yeah, it all starts there with the defenses, because everything in this game, including the score projections, our predictions, the way you think the game is going to go, is going to be determined by just the sheer amount of force it's going to take to accomplish anything on this football field.
So it's tough to predict this game. And I know we're not into predictions yet, but I'm just thinking, I've been thinking about this all day. Because if you asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have said Michigan pretty soundly. And this is even after the sign stealing stuff. Like, I think that's in the past. I think for this year, Michigan is an elite team. At least I think they are. It's hard for me, though, because I said this today. Somebody asked on Twitter, and I said Michigan could be the best team in the country by a significant clip, or they could be the 15th best team in the country. I have no idea, because I have my doubts about Penn State, at least offensively. I think Penn State's got a good defense. I think offensively I've got some real doubts about Penn State. And then after that, Michigan fans might bristle at this a little bit, but they haven't played anybody. They have absolutely played nobody. And they've had back-to-back weeks where the passing game has been really not there. And this is where maybe if we're talking about matchups and strengths and weaknesses, you're playing the other team's defense or you're playing the other team's offense, not your own. So you don't say like our defense is better than their defense. You do our offense versus their defense. Anyway, Ohio State's got a great pass defense. I think their pass defense is actually better than Penn State's. If you looked at the one weakness Penn State had, it was pass defense. Well, last week against a bad pass defense, JJ threw for like 7-point-something yards per attempt. It wasn't impressive. Had an interception. I don't think he had any touchdowns. And Michigan fans are saying 2 weeks in a row now we haven't thrown the ball well, and that's a choice. But because we're flexing our run game. Josh, I don't believe for a minute that Michigan State made a choice, a specific choice to say we're going to hold our pass game back to the point that we're going to have a one-score lead and punt the ball to you with a chance to beat us with 5 minutes left in the game and only 17 points through almost 4 quarters. That's not a choice they're making. If anything, I think it highlights, one, they're struggling a little bit in pass protection, and two, there are some real concerns with his pass game.
Yeah, and of course you mean Michigan and not Michigan State. You did the same thing with Washington State and Washington, so we do note those. We do these mostly in one take, guys. It's pretty hard to do, but it's unfortunate that we have, lives and time constraints. We usually have to do these in one take. It's a minor thing, but that's just sort of an example that it's hard. So I'm sure we'll get some stuff backwards when we do these videos. Give us a little bit of grace. Yeah, I agree with you. The point is that Michigan's absolutely not week after week risking losing games to Penn State and Maryland because they're holding something back with their passing offense. I can't buy that for a solitary second. I think it's more likely that the situations have just changed where they've been less effective. Look, you talked about the fact that the schedule's been bad, and maybe somebody will want to bristle, but look, it absolutely 100% has been bad. Probably the best team they've played, in my opinion, prior to Penn State was Rutgers, I would say. I mean, East Carolina has been very bad this year. You look at, and I'm doing this because right now ESPN has clearly been hacked and is throwing up spam. So as I'm looking at the schedule, it goes away. UNLV has been terrible for the most part. Maybe they're going to do well in conference, but relative to the rest of the country, they're not very good. Bowling Green's bad. Nebraska has been pretty darn bad, at least on offense, and that was the thing that really killed them in that game. Minnesota has no effectiveness on offense, not a great team altogether. Indiana has been terrible this year. Michigan State has been atrocious this year. Purdue has been terrible this year. And so that leaves you with Penn State and Maryland as the two games where you really had any objective ability to lose the game. And I will say, there are some interesting observations, Daniel, if you'll let me get into it, because I was actually at the Michigan-Maryland game, and as a lot of people know, you do get a little bit of a different feel for a team when you're there, and you can see the downfield routes, and you can see everything progressing. So if you let me talk about it for a second, I did actually have some major takeaways about Michigan. Maybe for a Michigan fan, plug your ears, but I'm going to talk honestly about where I felt like their passing game was. And there were some things, it's going to be controversial for me to say, but there were some takeaways I had about Michigan out of that I think probably hold true for the Ohio State game.
Yeah, I would love for you to get into that. And as you get into that, I want people to think about this one caveat. Michigan has been dominant until the Penn State game. They have been dominant this year. So, no, they haven't played anybody, but they have absolutely taken care of business, which is all you can ask them to do. The only issue there is it can mask potential weaknesses that I think you're about to talk about.
Yeah, and look, I'm going to kind of give you the option of two sides of the coin to look at to explain what I saw and the way that it was working as of that game. Okay, so Michigan's offense is really heavily predicated on moving the pocket with McCarthy and throwing on the run or throwing boundary throws from the pocket. So their idea basically is that they attack the line of scrimmage repeatedly, and when you stack the box, They get their bigger targets on the outside, and they like to throw out-breaking routes. Now, I know in the Maryland game, Roman Wilson went out. He's one of the better receivers. They don't have great receiver depth, so that was obviously a big thing that affected them. It was also interesting, Maryland constantly squib kicking is an indication of how dangerous Samaj Morgan is as a player. But most of Michigan's passing attack actually happens on the move or outside of the pocket. They really like to run bootlegs, naked bootlegs, roll the quarterback out. And the thing that was really striking to me in the Maryland game was how many times those rollouts got blown up. Because when they would roll out of the pocket, Maryland was frequently bringing outside pressure, be it outside linebackers or corners on blitzes. And when they would roll the pocket like that with McCarthy, he'd often end up with free rushers in his face. And a lot of those passing schemes, especially anytime you move the pocket, people think of it as an effective way to use a dual-threat quarterback. It is only effective if you don't have significant outside presence from free rushers. There's two ways to prevent that. The first is to have an effective run game. If the run game is being particularly effective between the tackles, it holds the inside linebackers inside, and even the edge players have to be very careful in their gap containment because they're often doing what's called two-gapping. They've got either side of the offensive tackle, and they can't just run wide, so it's easy for the quarterback to get outside them. Something that really affected Bryce Young his last year, they played LSU, and in that loss, Harold Perkins, who we've both talked about at length, we don't actually think he's been a particularly good defender in terms of an overall finished product right now, but as a spy where he can just run around, see ball, get ball, he was a phenomenal athlete, phenomenal football player, and Bryce Young loves to leave the pocket, and he would get run down, and that gave Alabama a lot of fits. Well, Michigan doesn't have to face that too much, partly because of the type of athletes that exist in the Big Ten. I think that's been part of the issue. There are a lot of bigger linebackers, not as many, modern super athletic rangy guys, but also the run game holds them inside. And now we get to kind of the conspiracy theory side to it, which, look, I've got to say this out loud, Michigan fans, and most of you are already pissed off because of our comments about the sign stealing scandal. A lot of our comments, if you are pissed off at us, realize a lot of the takes we've had, I'm sure some of you at least have started to come around to the fact that they weren't completely unreasonable. Me saying that any coach that had any association with this needed to be immediately fired. Well, Michigan has fired an assistant coach now. These takes haven't been wrong. You're probably still not quite ready to accept that, but they haven't been. It's been our honest takes in the situation. But if you know where a blitz is coming on a given play, and let's be realistic, we have every reason to believe that Michigan did know what the blitz calls were from opposing defenses. You can call naked bootlegs, rollouts, etc. with abandon. Because if the opposing team is going to blitz to that side, you're not going to roll into it. In the Maryland game, they gave up several sacks and negative plays, rolling the pocket into pressure. So I do think, I'm going to take this two steps. One, it has significantly, seriously impacted the quality of the passing game, that for the last couple weeks, they have not known where the blitz is coming from, and the scheme that they like to run has been adversely affected by that. Second, depending on how much of a tinfoil hat you want to wear, there is an argument that the style of offense that Michigan is playing, particularly in regard to the passing game, is almost predicated on knowing where the pressure is coming from. And that to play this style of offense, if you knew that you were going to more often than not know the pressure scheme that you were facing, it would be very effective with the knowledge that you weren't going to face a blitz from an unexpected direction. But when you begin to play teams that can bring a blitz that you do not know where it's coming from, suddenly this scheme that was almost feels tailor-made to knowing the defensive play call becomes much more erratic facing defenses that can bring pressure and keep you in the pocket or create negative plays because, again, they move the pocket a lot without really significant blocking protection, and it is dependent upon rolling the pocket away from pressure. So that was honestly my main take. And McCarthy as a quarterback is a pretty good thrower on the run, but his mechanics under pressure are not particularly good. Because he faced more pressure in the Maryland game is the main thing I saw. there were a lot more erratic throws. Now, Michigan did get guys open down the field with a fair amount, but most of what Michigan does in terms of downfield routes, all those rollouts have everybody kind of flood from one side to the other, and it's about him reading levels in order to make that pass. And again, those are just difficult things to do from an accuracy, mechanics, and a timing standpoint unless you have the time to make the throw. So we don't want to get into off-the-field stuff too much. Now, as stat guys, there's probably plenty of people that say we've never seen the football field, so everything we do is off the field and we should just shut up, which, I mean, that really makes for lovely football conversation. But that was my honest take watching the Michigan-Maryland game, at least from Michigan offensively. It was apparent to me that they were struggling with the variety of blitzes that Maryland was bringing, and as the game continued to go on, it struck me more and more that the offense Michigan runs really isn't an offense that's well designed to deal with defenses that can bring pressure from different areas. And that is a concern in Ohio State game where first they're going to face an Ohio State defense that is tremendously more athletic than almost anyone they've played. Maybe an argument for Penn State, but they're the only one that comes close. And two, they're in a situation where, look, you have to face reality at this point. They had an advantage in terms of knowing opposing play calls before, and they no longer have it. So those two things combined, to me, do explain a little bit why, for example, JJ McCarthy going into the Purdue game had never thrown for less than 9.3 yards per attempt, and that was the East Carolina game, but had averaged about 10.5 yards per attempt. Since that game, he's averaged, I think, under 8 yards per attempt, 9.1 against Purdue, 7.5 against Penn State. I know he didn't throw many attempts. 6.1 against Maryland. So it's objectively true that the passing attack has fallen off considerably. You can point to opposing defenses. Maryland, though, is not a great defense, and he had his worst outcome of the year against that Maryland defense. Long rant, but that was the reason I saw for that, and that was, to me, I mean, it's just something I couldn't ignore. I mean, that feels like the problem with Michigan and sort of the realities of their passing game.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's also this consideration that irrespective of why they're struggling, it's not to me, it doesn't bode well for Michigan if they think that they can beat elite teams with just hard-nosed running and defense, because that's like everybody does that now. Everybody at the highest level, that's table stakes, right? Like you know, that's like having a good weightlifting program or training program, like being a good running team, playing good defense. Everybody does that. Now Ohio State's got Treveyon Henderson back and healthy. He went off last week. I know it was against Minnesota, but like that's been, if you look at in terms of numbers and where Ohio State has hurt a little bit, is they had a stretch in the middle of the year where they weren't running the ball very well because, you know, their best running back was out. I think it starts to materialize a little bit a picture of where Ohio State has some advantages. I'm not really high on this Ohio State offense because, you know, I think back to the Penn State game. Now, Michigan and Ohio State had basically the same game against Penn State. Penn State was woefully ineffective, to their defense's credit, in moving the ball, which gave their offenses enough opportunities to finally break Penn State and win the games. But those were both, it was a 9-point win, 8-point win. But for me, my concern is games like that, where you only score 20 points in a game where the other offense is constantly giving you the ball. And, you know, Penn State, 3.5 yards per play against Ohio State, still could only get 20 points. So I'm not super high on it, but I think that there are a little more dynamic pieces and not just the reliance on the run. I don't think you're going to completely shut down Ohio State's passing game. I think there is a chance that you could completely shut down Michigan's passing game. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm saying it's possible.
Yeah, and you know, look, hopefully we haven't lost every Michigan fan with my long rant there, but again, look, guys, it'd be a lot easier for us to just blow smoke on both teams, do what a lot of people said, and say, you know, hey, this is nothing, and Michigan shouldn't be worried about it, or talk about how great Michigan is right now. But that Maryland-Michigan game was a bad data point. Look, that's the reality, okay? And if you're a Michigan fan, I think the way you want to view it is That was a game where we were preparing for the game. We weren't really up for it. It was a weird game.
Right.
I will tell you, having been in that stadium, weird game all around because it was 60% Michigan fans and dead. Look, if you're a Maryland fan watching this, I beseech you, when you're down 5 in the fourth quarter versus the number 1 team in the country, at least stand up. Like, that was the most dead stadium in that circumstance. And I've been to a lot of football games, guys, probably... Seriously, maybe like 200, and I don't think people completely understand how many football games and stadiums and teams I've actually seen over the course of my life because my family were all football fanatics. Most dead stadium I've ever seen, and especially given versus number 1 team, astonishingly so. It wasn't a good game. So, at most you can say that was me watching Michigan in their absolute off day. But I've also seen them against Penn State. Like you said, Penn State, and the other trick to me there is like the Rutgers game and even the game before they played Michigan. Penn State's struggled to hit 350 yards in a game now for weeks in a row. It's just a bad offense, I think, and we've never been high on Aller. We weren't really high on him going into the year. I am now continually at the point where and really, Aller was a big, slide aside, Aller was a guy that was a huge riser in the recruiting rankings. And I think he's just somebody that had a big senior year, and the mechanics and accuracy have not been there. He's a 6'4" big arm guy, but he doesn't play at a high enough level. And we're seeing a little bit, I think, of that with Michigan. And now I'll turn for Ohio State. If Ohio State fans are very too gleeful, I'm gonna be a little negative now for you. Sort of the brand of our channel, right? Ohio State has struggled in their passing game, and this is the flip side to this conversation. Ohio State, we talked about in our preview based off us watching them in the spring, their offensive tackles are a liability. They cannot hold up on pass pro for long periods of time. The offense has adjusted, and Ryan Day, to his credit, has rebuilt that offense around not holding the ball very well. McCord struggled a little bit early in the year. He dropped back too deep, which is what young quarterbacks do. He held the ball too long, which is what quarterbacks do. If you think McCord is terrible, I really advise you to go watch Alabama and what Jalen Milroe looked like early in the year, because those two problems were a completely other level for Alabama than they were for Ohio State. The difference is that Alabama's offensive tackles are significantly better than what Ohio State are fielding right now. And I'm not saying Alabama's left tackle is great, but Ohio State has serious issues. When you combine that with the fact that they can't really run the ball great, especially off tackle, which kind of hurts your explosiveness, it really has limited the offense. And so they've built this offense now around, really a lot of it is the short and intermediate passing game. They've found ways to be more effective in the run game. I think Treveyon has been, in many ways to me, almost more effective than Henderson. And probably a lot of people aren't shocked by that statement. Some maybe are. That has made Ohio State to be a more all-around quality offense. But when you face a Michigan team that generates a lot of pressure, it's going to be a problem. Because the other thing I saw in that Michigan-Maryland game is that Michigan really won that game because Talia Tagovailoa was under pressure every snap constantly. Michigan brought a lot of stunts. Maryland really struggled with the stunt game and the twist game that Michigan was running. They constantly had free rushers, or they'd have guys spin off a guy and come free. The outside players that Michigan brought were consistently effective. They beat Maryland with speed most of the time. Talia is not a great player under pressure. This is pretty well documented at this point. So they created some really stupid negative plays as a result of that. But it's also a credit to Michigan and who they are, the fact that Michigan does have a very good secondary. And so the other side of this, I will say, is it doesn't really matter, one, how great Michigan is, as long as they score some points and Ohio State doesn't. And two, it doesn't really matter so much how much of an explosive passing threats guys like Marvin Harrison Jr. are, if they don't have time to get the ball off. And I think that's part of the problem here is I don't see Ohio State being in a situation where they're going to have time to throw the ball deep, particularly often. I don't think their offensive tackles can hold up that long. And then when you're throwing in the short passing game, look, Harrison is a freak athlete because he's long and he's fast. But when you make him run out routes and comebacks and curls, while he's effective, he's not nearly as effective as he should be running downfield routes. And I'm not sure they'll have time for that. And McCord is, to some degree, I think, kind of regressed in his mechanics off and on in different ways. He's gotten better and worse. But he's had some problems, I think, due to those timing issues, probably due to how much they've reinforced him getting the ball off quick, where he's become more inconsistent as a passer because the mechanics break down. He's not setting his feet properly, probably doesn't feel like he has time to. And so that's the other side of it, right? I mean, both these teams have clear paths to struggling in the passing game. And the difference to me offensively, and I don't know that the defenses are even, but at least with Michigan, I can say that offensive line is very good. They reestablished the line of scrimmage against Maryland every play. It may have been a close game, but they won defensively at the line of scrimmage every snap. And offensively at the line of scrimmage, there were points where it was just comical. And Maryland, to their credit, I say credit, I would actually say detriment more than anything, it took them a half to realize they needed to load the box with everybody they had because they had to find some way to stop Michigan's run game and then take their chances with a passing game. Now, that worked out to their favor, but it won't always. But that gives Michigan a punch that they can run the ball, they can establish the line of scrimmage, and the passing game is a secondary aspect. Ohio State has not had that benefit. They have not been able to run the ball successfully week in and week out on a consistent basis. They have been good sometimes, they've done better later, but they haven't always been great. And with tackles that are getting beat without the ability to redefine the line of scrimmage, that means Ohio State can be in a situation where they are just flailing. And in Michigan might at least be able to move the ball. And if they can move the ball some, they can run play action, they can do some of the things they want to do. Might it get disrupted? Might they have negative plays? Sure, but that's an avenue to 20 points. And there's a chance that that's an avenue to 20 points that Ohio State maybe just doesn't have.
So, I know you just now have made everybody mad. Nobody's going to win this game because everybody sucks. What does the model say? And I want you to make a note about or kind of talk about how the model has changed on these two teams over the last 3 weeks.
Sure, and you're right. I probably made everybody mad because, look, if you watch this channel for a long time, hopefully you're a diehard football fan and you appreciate something, which is people get mad if you say the defenses are going to win. And I've talked about it a little bit from an aspect of weaknesses in the offense, but this should all be reflected around the fact that the defenses that the teams are facing are stellar. And any weakness on the offensive side of the ball is going to be exploited by the opposing defense, and it's going to cause a low-scoring game, which is what our model sees. Sees this as being a 23-17 game in Michigan's favor. Interestingly, we flag this whenever it happens, it sees Ohio State at 5.6 yards per play and Michigan only at 4.85. So the biggest thing I'll flag here is Michigan is actually expected to be outgained but win. And that speaks to the fact that Ohio State has, as we often say, is consistently inconsistent at scoring in the red zone. They have a lot of empty possessions in the red zone. They have, dated back to the Notre Dame game, we flagged that even early in the season. And so our model really gets skittish anytime Ohio State's yardage isn't very high because there is an established track record of Ohio State of them not scoring a ton of points. I will also say that scoring is going to be lower here because our model does also account for the number of possessions expected into a game. It expects this to be a shorter game. Something I want to flag, though, Daniel, there's two things. One, Michigan's consistency score. We have not explained consistency score enough. I think we need to probably change the name, honestly, to predictability score because I don't think people understand it, even though we have a tooltip. The consistency score indicates the rate at which prior games for a given team match what our current model would expect for the outcome against those teams. So basically what our model is doing is it generates a prediction for this game, generates scoring models and predictive models for the performance of each team in a given game in a matchup sense. And then we're taking this extra step and we're going back and looking at previously played games and reapplying our model to those games to see if you get the result that actually happened on the field. That never happens to 100%. The reason being, teams are always variable in performance. So the model is saying if you play your B+ game, this is what you're going to get. Well, sometimes you played your A game, sometimes you played your C game. The consistency score for Michigan is 18.7. That's very low. Now, this metric is a little bit arbitrary for various reasons, but it's got to be one of the lowest, if not the lowest, of any team that we have in our model. And what that is saying is, based off current performance for Michigan, based off the way that it builds a model and tries to project where Michigan would be, our model has almost no ability week in and week out to consistently predict outcomes for Michigan. What it's doing is saying that based off this result, it feels like maybe 60% of the time this model accounts for the games. And the other 40% of the time, it doesn't. And the model can't quite make heads or tails. Again, if you're an Ohio State fan, you're going to put your tinfoil hat on and talk about the last few games. I actually can't stick my hand in the model in this particular instance and tell you which ones it thinks are right and which ones it thinks are wrong. It's not... We'd have to go way deep down the math train, but that's not something you can really do. But it does indicate the fact that Michigan, in its view, is almost a total wild card. And the fact that Michigan has 4.9 yards per play and is predicted to outscore Ohio State in this game is a big red flag that the model here does not think it understands Michigan at all. And to your point, when we talk about where these things are at, Michigan had a big shift just last week in the model. They've been predicted to win. We model you against all 133 teams in the country, so it's 132 games. Michigan in that was expected to go about 130-2. Well, just after last week, the model shifted, and now it's about 127-5. So the number of games Michigan would lose against the rest of the field has actually more than doubled in a week, just based off how the model views that Maryland game. And this goes back to the fact that our model is very much kind of predicated on the idea that there's a certain amount of yardage you need to be successful, a certain amount of yardage where you go off. And, we kind of coined a lot of the freeze point, stall point stuff you maybe heard on other channels. That was a concept that we, I think, genuinely innovated about 6 or 7 years ago. And Maryland gave some ideas on where that is because it exists both offensively and defensively in the model. It does that on both sides. And it showed the model, okay, if you were successful enough defensively, maybe you can actually score on Michigan. Notably, Georgia went from a pretty significant gap. They actually jumped Oregon, and now they closed from about 7 losses predicted to Michigan's 2 to now 4.8 and 6. Georgia is almost completely caught up to Michigan. I expect if Michigan were to lose, especially like 30-20 to Ohio State, Georgia will actually jump Michigan entirely in our model. So in the last couple weeks, just those Penn State and Maryland games, Michigan went from a team that in our model was virtually invincible to a team that is now mortal as relative as Georgia's mortal, which is still very, very good. Again, Ohio State jumps Michigan in FPI. So there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes here, and there's a lot of stuff. We talk about it subjectively, talking about schedule. The numbers are saying it objectively. This was a Michigan team that dominated inferior competition to an insane degree to where they were almost unbeatable. And now that they've had just a couple games against real competition, it still views Michigan as the better team than Ohio State. But one, it says the margin's a lot slimmer than it thought it was 3 weeks ago. And two, our model is starting to throw up red flags to say the data doesn't quite make sense. It cannot understand Michigan from a consistency perspective over the course of the year. And the rate of unexpected outcomes that could happen in this game, at least in our model's view, has gone up 5 times. So there's a lot of stuff here to say. There's a lot we know and a lot we don't know, and this game is probably even more unpredictable than we thought.
It's more unpredictable, which is why this prediction is probably going to be incorrect. We have not gotten this game right in years. When we pick Michigan to win, they do not. When we pick Ohio State to win, they do not. To me, it's one of those situations where there's unknowns because of the sign stuff and because of the schedules and the fact that they're both, at the end of the day, still really, really good, if not elite teams. Could be the 2 best teams in the country. We don't know, and I don't think we'll know until the playoffs. For me, I think that I agree with you that Ohio State has left tackle issues. I think Michigan might have tackle issues in pass protection. Good run blocking team, but might have issues in pass protection. This Ohio State secondary has improved so much in the last 2 years that I think the only way that you're going to beat them is to – I'll take a step back. I think the only way that either one of these teams wins is the formula that Michigan used last year. Michigan wasn't going to consistently drive the field against Ohio State with the way they play offense. They had to get some chunk plays or some busts, and score that way. And I do think that Michigan has a better opportunity to do that this year than drive the field consistently. But I'm just the Maryland game, and I do think it's a fair point that they were probably preparing, looking ahead. The Maryland game for me, after the unimpressive Penn State game, I can't get over it. And I do think that not having Harbaugh there is going to hurt them a little bit. Coaches aren't just figureheads on the sideline. There's a lot that other coaches are having to do to pick up the slack. Ironically, having to prepare more off the field for something that's not on the field, which is what they did to other teams with the sign stuff. I think that's going to hurt them a little bit. And so I think Ohio State's going to win this one. And I don't think it's going to be that close because I think Michigan's offense is going to shut down. Ohio State 27, Michigan 17. Tell me what you got.
This is one of those instances where, again, if we were a channel that catered to audiences more, I'd probably pick different for the sake of picking different. But I'm going to go with a score that I had in my head before, just to be honest with it. I have Ohio State 24, Michigan 21. I personally think the team that wins this game is probably going to be the team that gets the one or two negative plays that are necessary to win. And the thing that, in many ways, I found most alarming about the Maryland game, if Michigan does not block a punt, get a safety, get the ball, score, and take a lead, they probably lose that game. And I did not see a lot in that game that told me that Michigan really had an ability to break out and have, real score when they needed to in crunch time in that game to win, especially on a fast clock. Now, I can't ever predict exactly who's going to have the bigger play, but I just feel like from what I've seen in these two teams, Ohio State has been improving and peaking a little more than Michigan has. And so I feel like Michigan is more likely to make a critical error or two that's enough to lose. I do think Ohio State's run defense has improved substantially, which I think is the key to beating Michigan, unsurprisingly. And in our metrics, Ohio State has the number one pass defense in the country. They're 21st against the run, but it's a little unfair because the run offenses they've played have been so mediocre that holding teams to 3.2 yards per carry still only lets you be 21 on our metrics, just because the teams they've played have actually been very, very bad. But I think they've shown enough week in and week out to say that it's not just a scheduling fluke. They are legitimately quite good. And so, yeah, I take Ohio State by the narrowest of margins. Kind of hate that I didn't pick Michigan's for the sake of splitting it because I don't feel like I know what's going to happen. The model, as I said, has already flagged it doesn't think it knows what's going to happen. It's going to be the most interesting, most watched version of the game that we've ever seen, and I'll leave sort of with an anecdote there. There's a lot of implications, obviously, for the playoff. I think the conference championship is sort of being viewed as a foregone conclusion for Iowa. I'll be completely honest, I don't think that's necessarily unjustified. We'll probably do a preview for that game, but Iowa shockingly doesn't impress us. Having the lowest over-under in history tends to do that. But there's some weird stuff there even in projections that show just how hard it is to sort this out. So I was looking at FBI's All-State, or their projection thing, which I believe is the same as the All-State playoff predictor. Michigan is predicted to win the division 55% to 45%. Which I assume means that they're predicted to beat Ohio State because that's what it should mean. Yet Ohio State is more likely to make the playoff 62% to 58%. I am yet to square those things together, that Ohio State Michigan's favored to win the game, but Ohio State is more likely to make the playoff. There may be something really strange there about likelihood to make it in when you lose the game. I don't know. I think it's really weird. Now there's there's other weirdnesses going on as well, but it is an interesting one, and it more than anything else. We talk about games being hard, and we've had a number of games this year that we feel like have been some of the hardest we've ever had to pick, and I think that's been reflective in how chaotic the year has been, how many upsets there have been. I can't say that I can remember a game at the end of the year where it's not just how difficult it is to pick, but how much I feel like the last game of the year is finally going to tell me what I need to know about two teams. Because I don't think I really understand Michigan. The model doesn't think it understands Michigan. and I still don't really feel like I know Ohio State and know whether or not their offense is capable of something more than I've seen in games like the Notre Dame game. I think we'll find that out. And I think these are two really good teams that are clearly the class of the Big Ten. And, you know, it may well be the bounce of the ball here that determines a winner and really determines the way a lot of coaches, legacies, and really the entire, maybe even the whole recent history of these two programs in this rivalry are viewed. Because certainly whether or not Michigan wins this game, whether Ohio State wins the game, given everything else off the field, is going to leave a really lasting imprint along how a lot of things are viewed.
All right, y'all. This was a long one. We want to remind you, please not only like and subscribe, but share this video where you talk ball. It helps us out so much. And there's going to be a lot of conversation this week around this game, and we want to be a part of it. We think this is a good quality product, and we love sharing things like the model and things like relative performance stats with y'all, just to get the talk going beyond just the hate. So let us know in the comments what you think this score is going to be, and we will get down there with you and tell you how you're wrong, or maybe if you agree with us, how you're right. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. Have a great Thanksgiving, and God bless.